James at Laurier. I have the pleasure of introducing our two breakout speakers, Andy and Ryan. Ryan has been ministering to students in Waterloo since 2007 and has walked with many students as well as family members who have deconstructed their faith, as well as some people who have come back. He has an MDiv at Heritage Seminary. He is an associate Theb chaplain and is also Great Youth Learning Center director. He's married to Ashley and they have 3 kids in the preteen and teenage years. Andy, you've heard in our main sessions, is the national director of Power to Change Students, a post-secondary ministry that walks to see every student growing closer to Jesus and experiencing life in Him. E2C students hopes to see all students take their next steps towards Jesus, whether they are a believer or not. And 20 years ago, Andy and his wife, Lonnie, moved to Ottawa, from Ottawa to Montreal, where they served ever since, and they have 4 lovely children. To me, Ryan's my supervisor, and Andy is our national director, so would you join me in welcoming them up?
We've got a fun session this afternoon. Really, you just ate a heavy lunch. We heard a lot of heavy content this morning, so we're going to do our best to make this fairly interactive, and so that you don't fall asleep on us. Even though, I mean, there's biblical precedent for that in the book of Acts, right? People falling asleep during sermons and getting in trouble. So we don't want that. So to introduce our theme, we want to talk about how do we accompany students in the midst of doubt. And I want to begin even before Ryan and I are gonna have a conversation about it, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask questions and to engage with Ryan and his experience as well. But I thought I'd begin just by acknowledging what we want to talk about this afternoon in accompanying people is quite different from some of what we heard about this morning. And so Tim did a phenomenal job and is an unbelievable communicator in talking about the platform. How do you actually engage in a social media platform? And it gives you a picture of kind of the challenge of that environment and the back and forth that happens on a social media platform. But it's super important for us to acknowledge that social media is not real life in terms of how we actually interact with people, right? Because as soon as you're face-to-face with people, all of the angst and anger is actually something that we can actually begin to manage and engage with. Whereas on a social media platform where people are interacting anonymously, it's simply a different environment. And so what might work really well on a social media platform probably won't translate particularly well to the people that you care about, that you're seeking to walk alongside. And so I just thought it good for us to acknowledge that, because we're having conversations at different levels as we talk through this broad topic of doubt and deconstruction. And so in this conversation, we really want to talk more interpersonally. What can we learn about what it means to accompany people as they walk through different seasons of life, as they walk through different doubts and questions that they might have? And so inevitably, this conversation is going to be a little bit more personal. It's going to reflect more of a how do we actually de-escalate some of the angst that people have when it comes to doubt and deconstruction. And so rather than just hearing me talk, though, I really think you benefit from hearing Ryan's perspective. Ryan is somebody who's walked alongside students for how many years, Ryan? 17 years, walking alongside students kind of week in, week out. And so I'm going to have a bit of a conversation with Ryan, and I'll invite you to join me in the conversation with some questions as well. So Ryan, what do you do to create a space where students feel comfortable actually talking about their doubts?
Yeah, I think a big part of that is just making sure that we even do share some of the challenges that we're going through, or we're opening up a dialogue. And so we do want to have times where people are talking from the front, but in a lot of spaces we create on campus, it's not just where we have a predetermined plan. And even after when someone does speak, we do have a lot of times to listen to people's concerns. And I would say that also, sometimes it just takes that initiative to ask people questions. There are students that I engage with who I can tell are a bit down or just haven't been coming out for a while, and texting them or seeing what's going on in their lives, taking that initiative often creates space. It depends. Everyone's going to have a different person they want to talk to, but someone will be willing to talk to friends that they'll want to open up to first, and some will do it more in a community that's larger. But I think if we're not noticing people, they won't often just invite us into their lives. And
Yeah, that's a really significant point. So I hear you talk about the idea that we need to pay attention to what's happening in people's lives and be willing to engage with questions. I hear you talking about the idea that we need to actually share from our perspective in a way that's vulnerable as well. That vulnerability fosters vulnerability. When I share from my perspective what I'm wrestling with, that creates that creates permission for other people to feel like my questions are welcome as well.
Yeah, and often when someone does share something quite vulnerable, like even in a group setting, I think just even acknowledging that to the whole group, like, thank you for sharing that. That was vulnerable. Like, I appreciate that you were willing to tell me that. Or if they do that individually, that's so vital to keep it going. Because if someone does have a bad experience opening up and then they get shut down quickly, I certainly think that is not what we want within.
Yeah. Have you had the experience of having to fix something afterwards, where somebody shared something vulnerability and it's fallen flat? Or
Yeah, well, I do remember one experience, and someone was quite critical of someone's former Catholic background, and it wasn't even what we as the leaders did, but someone else said. And so we definitely had to go back and talk to that person individually and acknowledge some of the hurt that was happening, because it's easy to have just a quick comment make someone feel uncomfortable, and that it does need repair.
So what I hear you describing is a bit of it's a particular skill set. I sometimes think about these conversations and I get caught thinking about the answers that I need to have. And so how do I answer all the hard questions that people are going to bring? But what you're describing to me sounds like a bit of a different skill set. How would you describe some of the skills that, some of the expertise that you feel like you need to be able to bring to the table in conversations?
I think one of the first ones that I would say even I would notice a lot of students come to me about even asking is that they're like, I don't know all the answers. This person came to me with this, and I don't necessarily know what to say to them. And I think part of it's just helping them normalize that that's okay. You don't have to know all the answers in the moment. Each person has to figure out this individually, like what they are able to be a knowledge expert in, and sometimes it's a space for someone to grow in that, like if you realize you're not there. But I think one of the first skill sets is just being willing to acknowledge when you don't know, and just to feel okay in that. Also just the fact that I think that we do rely on community is part of that too, that we need other people. And sometimes I know I'm not the right person to answer something for someone, or sometimes they need another type of person to engage with. And so just to acknowledge when that's the case, and to just the need of community. Sometimes people's answers are not even just the intellectual answers, but they need a community to help them walk through this. And I also would say one of the things I've at least noticed is clarifying things with people, because there's so much that if you can respond with very quickly when someone asks a question that seems doubting, that may not be the question they're actually asking. Sometimes they're asking a very different question, or they're just telling you and not wanting you to really respond. So the more I engage with people, just clarifying why they asked me or told me that. Well, first thanking them. Like I often start by thanking them, but then also just seeing like what part of what's behind why they're telling me this, because some people also, I would say, just want to be heard in that moment. And if you come out with a lot of answers very quickly, they might actually feel like you're hurt from not listening.
Yeah, I think that's really significant. So I tend to assume that I need to have answers, and I love having answers. I love being the person that people can turn to with questions. And I'm learning more and more that in coming back to people with answers really quickly all the time, I often create an image that that's what healthy Christianity looks like. It's that I've got all the answers and that you need to be like me. That maturity means that I've memorized the answers and I've read the right books, instead of maturity being I'm actually walking closer to Jesus and growing in faith, and that I don't need to be a subject matter expert on everything. So I really appreciated what Sundar Krishnan shared about this yesterday, that idea of actually being able to direct people to other experts, to identify the expertise around you and in your community, and actually helping people connect with somebody who might have the answers. But I've also, like you, I've seen the power of actually saying to somebody, I don't know how to answer that question. Could we work on it together? Like, could we actually take the time to try to talk to some people or read something together and explore? I've just noticed how that diffuses the sense of urgency and angst that I feel, and that maybe they feel about, I've got to sort this out now. We've got to get this, well, we've got to wrestle this thing down. And instead kind of diffusing, lowering the pressure and saying, that's a great question. I could tell you a couple of things, but help me understand more what you're thinking. And let's try to think through what it would look like to actually grow in our understanding of that together. Let's pursue something together.
Yeah, and I think that part of that is also dealing with your own emotional angst that you might feel in that moment. Like whenever someone comes to me with some challenge, there is sometimes the urge that, oh no, this what I'm actually dealing with is my own pain. And I think that was also mentioned in how they're bringing this up. Maybe it's triggering to some degree in something that you've dealt with in the past, and I know that's been true for me. And so there's a bit of just acknowledging that to myself in that moment and taking a breath and realizing I'm not the savior of this person in this moment. There's a journey.
Yeah, really, really meaningful. One of the things that I've increasingly seen in my life is that unless I'm attentive and aware to what's going on in my own heart, I can't actually be present to other people. Okay, so if I'm not aware of the anxiety or the angst that I bring into the conversation or that I bring in response to their question, I'm simply going to react to what they're bringing. I'm going to find myself acting in a way that cares more about me and my thinking and protecting myself, rather than actually being able to pay attention to that in myself and say, wait, actually, what I want to do is be present to them. I want to hear their question. I want to follow up and ask them more questions. I want to serve them and not just serve myself. And I can certainly point to times in my life where I've had conversations with people and thought on the other side of it, man, I don't know if I actually served them as much as I really sought to serve myself. I feel a little bit better about that conversation, but I don't know if they do, if that actually met the need that they have. And so I think there is something really significant in that place of just paying attention. What's going on in my own heart? And acknowledging even just that it costs something to engage in hard conversations, right? It costs something to engage in hard conversations. And so how do I pay attention to what that looks like in me so that I can actually be attentive to somebody else? I'm curious to hear you talk more about the role of community in this. What does it look like, not just for you as a person, but what's the role that you see of community in actually accompanying people as they navigate doubt?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that I've seen over the years is that it often is the group witness of like 5 or more Christians, no matter what, and almost anyone making any turn in their understanding of it. Like I do know there's even, there was a student last year at Laurier who was someone who was involved in his first year and he had has seemingly genuine faith at that time. Like he seemed very passionate and young man, but after he wasn't involved during the pandemic. And then I remember randomly running into him, not at Laurier, but at another place. And he was just like, he had been someone who was extremely isolated during the pandemic. And I think one of the interesting things was he told me very quickly, like, I'm not a Christian anymore. And I was like, oh, okay. Thanks for sharing that with me. Like you still want to connect with you. I'm glad to know this, thank you for telling me this in your life. And he actually, coming back to Laurier the next year, had a crisis. And it was probably because of that just initial conversation. He decided to seek help from people. It was like a dating relationship problem. And I mean, that also related to his thing. He was dating a non-Christian and a lot of things. But I think it was kind of like out of that challenge that he was seeking other men to connect with him and to know what was going on. And it wasn't just me, but it was like joining a small group of guys all year round where we were talking about the Bible, but we were also doing things together, that he started to realize that maybe some of why he decided not to be a Christian any longer was based on, some of the pain he experienced in his home church. And it wasn't like how all Christians were behaving. And he actually saw like a space where his love was history, and we engaged him in talking about history. Like he's a history buff through and through. And I just remember thinking, wow, this is not what I talk about in church and in this setting, but everyone was okay to talk with him about what he wanted to talk about history. And that was a good space for him. It was different than what he'd ever experienced before. And I'm just so thankful too, that even the community at one point like he was just expressing his angst over losing the relationship. And he was saying that some of the other Christians in his life were just like, well, it's good that you're not dating a non-Christian anymore. And they were just giving all the negatives about it. But some of the community expressed, I can understand that this would be painful to you. And he said that was so meaningful to him. Like just the fact that he was losing something, even though it was maybe unbiblical, he's still just acknowledging the loss was something the community helped him in. So, yeah.
Oh, that's really significant. I'm curious. I'm curious to hear maybe a couple pieces of advice you'd have about what's been helpful and not helpful in the process of walking alongside people.
Yeah. Well, yeah. There's a number of different things. I think definitely it's helpful to pray no matter what. I think there's many situations I have with students where I realize I don't have a lot of control. Like they're struggling with something. I mean, some people can be going through doubt because of a pornography addiction. I feel like every year someone comes up to me about that. And I mean, I certainly can help them to some extent, but I cannot help them throughout the whole process of that. And so, I mean, I'm always praying for them and trying to direct them to people who would be helpful for them in the next journey. But yeah, I especially find it's always interesting when someone comes with like something really vulnerable like that. Not just pornography addictions, but there's so many different things that they express to me I just say, thank you for sharing this with me. This must have been a big thing for you to share with me. And they always generally assume that they're the first person that has ever told me this. And I'm like, no, this happens on a regular basis. You're not alone in this. And I think there's something about that normalizing the situation, that it's okay to have troubles in your walk with Christ and difficulties. And to clarify, I would say after that, why they're sharing it with me, because I don't want to just assume that they just want me to give them a long lecture to explain how you get out of this. I find for most of them, there definitely has to be a bit of give and take, and I have to even determine if I'm the right person to answer all their problems. But I guess one of the things I have learned over the years too is that I can't always assume that the relationship is close. Sometimes they're telling me these things because they actually want to leave the community, or they're really hurt. And so like it's hard to know why people always go through these seasons, but I guess I can't be overly anxious about that and sort of say, oh, I have to defend P2C or defend the church. There has to be a place for being like, no, I acknowledge your hurt here. And so some relationships are with people, I think when I look back, like 10 years ago, I might have assumed the relationship, but now I've realized with some people, you have to just test it out a bit and see why they're saying that. And I would say that with family especially. I've noticed that with family, like you can't assume the relationship just because I think some of my early mistakes were with family, just assuming they would understand because we grew up in a Christian home or something like that, but that does not hold any water. It's definitely even more tenuous with family.
I wonder if even there's an assumption in different levels of life. We can live kind of somewhat compartmentalized lives. And one of the things that I've seen is that there are people who are willing to trust me with one part of their life, but I haven't actually shown them that I'm trustworthy in another part of life. And so they may trust me to teach them something, but I may not be the person that they actually think, I want to unburden myself to Andy. I want to tell Andy what's actually happening in my life. And so I know for myself, learning to ask good questions, learning to demonstrate that I'm interested in them and not just in kind of an outcome. Even though I'm deeply interested in an outcome, I want them to walk closer to Jesus, but showing that I actually care deeply about them has been meaningful in that process as well. It's been it opens things up.
And I think part of what you can understand too is even just where they're getting their information from. And I would say, by and large, what I would say most people do today, or at least students do today, when they have a problem is they Google it. And it's like they're watching YouTube videos or they're watching TikTok potentially. And whenever I hear that, I'm glad to hear what their pain is. And often there's some significant pain, like there's a line that someone said on a YouTube video or something. That has come up many times for me, where I'm like, oh, okay, well, yeah, what do you think about that statement? Let's think about that biblically a little bit for a moment. And that has been a helpful dialogue. But yeah, I often try, usually after listening to someone for quite a while, try to encourage them not just to look to online sources, to look to community, to look to people who are experts around you to talk with these things, because it's just so heated. Also, I would say people take things like out of their cultural context and assume that like this is how Christianity has to be everywhere or something like that, and then they get fired up by something that's a problem in another part of the world, and it's highly challenging to even respond to that locally, because it's not our problem. And it takes a lot for them to detangle that from their own lives. Like, yes, and the pain of looking online just keeps going if they keep going back to it and back to it and back to it. And so, yeah, I've challenged some people to like just don't look at anything online for like at least a week. You know, like it'll help you to just process yourself, yeah, and talk with others who maybe you can have trusted relationships with. You know.
Well, and I know that I keep thinking back to this story. A friend of mine was going through a challenging season where she was really wrestling with questions of how the church deals with women, and so she was reading tons and tons and watching videos and getting increasingly agitated about the church's treatment of women. Now, what was interesting, I really appreciated this. She went and talked to her pastor and said, "I've got all these concerns about how the church treats women." And he just very wisely asked her, "Has that been your experience here?" And she said, "Oh, well, no." He said, "Okay, praise God. I'm really thankful that hasn't been your experience here. It's great that you're paying attention to a big concern that exists out in the world. And let's make sure that you don't root it in your own experience as well. Pay attention to what God's actually doing in your immediate community." And so, keeping that connection between everything the content that I'm inundated with online versus what I'm actually experiencing in my day-to-day, I think is actually really meaningful. I know for myself, I was telling somebody this earlier, when I'm frustrated, I've had a frustrating day, I've learned this about myself. It can be really tempting to go online and read frustrating things. Okay, so I have a bad day and some people frustrate me. Nobody in this room, none of my wonderful work colleagues. But my temptation is to go on Twitter and actually just read some rants from some people. And it took me years to realize that I was kind of subconsciously doing this. But somehow it felt better to feel spooled up and angry about something because it matched what I was experiencing, this unprocessed anger in another part of my life. And it's been a choice, it's been a discipline to realize when I'm tempted to go to Twitter and get spooled up by somebody else's problems, to realize, oh shoot, there's something going on in my own heart that I need to pay attention to. I think I'm frustrated. Now, sometimes my kids tell me that too, which is really helpful and frustrating. When they point out to me at the dinner table, "Dad, what's your deal? You're really frustrated today." Or as my 16-year-old likes to say, "That wasn't very Jesus-y, Dad." Yeah, she's a gift. So I need to pay attention to that, and I need to help other people pay attention to that. Are the problems that I'm dealing with, or am I getting spooled up by something externally that needs to actually be dealt with locally, immediately? Or what's actually happening?
Yeah. Yeah, and so the other thing I would say that's helpful is also just to, I've had different types of relationships, and when we were talking about online stuff, there's been alumni that have done similar things. Maybe they're not ex-evangelicals in the sense that they're like, but I haven't seen them for 10 years all of a sudden, and then they post online, "I'm no longer a Christian," or something like that. And I saw a lot of other people respond to them on their feed, and then they would get 100 messages afterwards, like saying like how terrible you are to respond to this person as a Christian. You're just trying to win them back that quickly. But with every one of those people who've done that at Waterloo, I have personally messaged them and then had a phone conversation at least with them individually.
Oh, way to go.
And it's been genuinely good, like, to listen to them, and it's not confrontational. It's like, I mean, I had no agenda going into that meeting. I would say I had to come to a place in my own heart where I was like, I'm not trying to convert them back. I am just listening to their story to see if they, and I would say all of them that have done that, and over the years, there always will be, I think, a number of Judas-type figures like that will go away. I think with all of them, they appreciated that I phoned them, and they said how other Christians, they lost all their relationships with all of other Christians, how they were isolated. I found out different things about them through these things. And I would say all of them I still have connection with, even though, yeah, I don't think any of their views have changed. I think they're all still calling themselves a Christian. But it is interesting just that creates such a different space than an online forum where you're just going to get an angry response. So, I just appreciated, like, actually one of the things that's interesting for me too, they often ask me questions like about things like, do you have any non-Christian family members or things like that? And how have you interacted with them after I've conversation with them? And I've actually told them, I mean, honestly, in my own life, my brother is no longer a Christian. He's kind of excommunicated me because he doesn't want to be involved with any other Christians. And all of them have told me, I don't want that to be the type of relationship I have with Christians, is just excommunicating them. So I think that even creating a space to show like we can be friends still after they've come out as not a Christian is quite a significant thing, and not something they experience with too many other Christians. So.
Yeah, I think that's really meaningful. I mean, I think even at the heart of this, asking the question of what's behind the question or what's behind the statement, I think increasingly when I survey social media, the question I try to consistently ask every time I see somebody post something is, I wonder why they're posting that. Whether it's good or bad. I mean, it could be a picture of their dog, and I'm still thinking, I wonder why they're posting that. Like, what's the impulse behind them actually doing that? Is this a bid for intimacy? Are they reaching out and wanting some affirmation or some like reminder that they have friends out there? Are they sharing a moment of joy? When they say something like, I'm no longer a Christian, or I can't stand the church, or whatever it would be, to actually ask the question, I wonder what's behind that. And then to ask them that question. I saw your post. I'm curious what's behind that. Can you tell me more about it? I'd really like to understand what you're experiencing right now.
And another thing I've just observed is all of them became isolated. They all became isolated from community, and they thought they had to seek out the answers themselves. Mm-hmm. And so for me personally, I always, and when students are graduating, I just had a banquet on Wednesday, I'm always saying, you need to find new community. You cannot live out your Christian faith on your own. And when they move to a new city or they choose not to be involved in a local church in these sort of things, it's going to weigh on you. You can't be a Christian alone. So I think that's another way we really need to be advocating. And I always tell youth pastors this too when they're moving to a new city, is like, follow up with those people, like check in with them. Have they found a church? Or even after, when they're leaving to a job in another place, follow up with them, see if they found new community, because that seems to be the most consistent factor I found too.
Yeah, because there's something significant about the way that we experience the gospel in community, right? So we hear the gospel preached, and that's wonderful. We sing the gospel in our songs, but there's something powerful about the way that we experience the gospel in community that reinforces what's real, hopefully. Hopefully reinforces something that's real about God's love. And that's deeply important in this moment. As I talked about last night, the next generation really is asking a question about the goodness of Christianity. Is Christianity actually good? Is there goodness to the gospel? Not is it true? Totally valid question, but is it good? And does it actually, can I experience goodness in living out the gospel and living in a gospel community? And so we've identified that as a ministry, the significance of those handshake moments between different seasons of life, as people go from high school youth group off to university and they move to a new city, as people go from university and they move to a new town for a job. But as you move between different seasons, the significance of that handshake, that transition from one place to another, is what actually ensures that you continue to find community where you can actually experience the gospel. Anyway, I won't go much deeper into that, but wanted to actually shift gears a little bit and throw it back to you. We've talked for half an hour. What questions would you have? Yeah.
To doubts that students are showing now, are they new doubts or different doubts than a generation ago? Or are they basically the same flavor, maybe different words, but are there new things that are challenging them more so now than a generation ago?
For the sake of the video, maybe I'll just say that we the question was whether the doubts are different from a decade ago or not. Yeah, I think at least things like speaking about colonialization or connections of historic Christianity to doing harm, I wouldn't say 17 years ago when I started that was even a conversation. I'd also say the number of students that talk to me about their LGBTQ friends is much significantly higher than ever before. Like, I do know that was a conversation, but it's everywhere now, that one. So like, and yeah, the ones that are the same, yeah, students have always dealt with sexual addictions and pornography challenges, that being away from home and in a dorm room and having access to the internet, it's dangerous. And I think that's one of the ones that's consistent. But there's so many reasons why people, I wouldn't say, it's hard to answer that question because some of them are the same maybe and some are different. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think even the environment in which people bring those doubts is different. So I know that that's going to be in the next generation, that's where they will go for information. Okay, they're going to turn to, instead of turning to Google, they'll turn to ChatGPT. And so I'd kind of like to know what ChatGPT is telling them so that we can figure out how to walk alongside them. And so you've got the context changes. So you've got a ubiquity of information, access to information that just wasn't true 20 years ago. You've also got a change in context, I would say. Sociologists talked about this, started talking about this before COVID, but COVID accelerated it. They would say that the next generation struggles more with joining skills. I don't know if I referenced that last night. Okay, so joining skills. So the capacity to actually integrate yourself to a new community of people. So one of the gifts that we parents have given our children is that we have often mediated relationships for them, and we have stepped in to help them actually join groups and communities and things like that. The role of parents increased over the last 25 years in terms of helping kids mediate relationships and find their way into a group. The downside of that has been that kids now struggle to figure out their way. How do I actually engage with a new group of people? How do I so we talk, you might phrase it in terms of social anxiety, but the other side of it would just be, it's joining skills. It's the capacity to show up in a new place and figure out, how do I actually make friends? And so we can see it in ministry sometimes where students will show up once, stand at the back of the room, and if somebody doesn't engage them in the first 10 minutes, they turn around and walk out and think, yeah, it's too hard. And so that change, which was then accelerated by COVID, where most of our relationships were mediated online, I think that changes the context. So then when we talk about the need for community around you as you navigate doubt, there's a fresh challenge. Are they deep? Are they in communities where they've learned what it means to join a community and to be vulnerable?
And I think another thing is, I would say that maybe the pressure to know all the answers has probably increased. I feel like back in the day, people would be like, some of the core Christian apologetic answers, if you knew some of those, people felt pretty competent. But now there are cultural apologetic answers that people wrestle over more, I would think, too.
Yeah. Another question? Yeah.
Do you find these students that have either deconstructed or bloated, are you finding that they are coming back? I see by that they are finding the answers through the gospel.
I mean, I can say over the years, there's always been people who have come back. I don't know the percentage, but I would say especially the trend I would say is that there's usually guys, especially guys that I've encountered in their third year or fourth year, who say, I had a terrible first 2 years. I grew up as a Christian, but I've been in the scene for a while, and they're broken. And so God does do that to people and naturally bring them to us. But there's also some people who, for sure, I've encountered people on campus who are mockers, who said, oh yeah, I grew up in a Christian home, and I can't believe you still do this here. Christianity doesn't. I've had some people just say that we're at a booth and like, you shouldn't even be here. This is an academic institution, and they're former Christians. That is what they say. So yeah, it's hard to say, but I mean, you respond differently to different people, and I would just say so the one guy I talked about just last year, there's also another guy this year, just two at Laurier in the last 2 years who have said they weren't a Christian and now they're saying they're a Christian again, and yeah, it's hard to say too, where there are students too that when the Catherine and I interacted with who were even student leaders in a group where they're encountering serious doubt. They don't tell anyone else in the community, but then they're at a point where when they're coming to us, they're like, unless you can give me some answers, I might have to leave the faith. That's kind of where they're at. So yeah. But thankfully, I think we answered okay.
Yeah, I can think of a great story that I just heard this week. My friend's daughter had gone away to university and had very consciously decided in her first year that she was not going to go to church, and she was not going to definitely wasn't going to get involved in Power to Change, and the list went on, and has had a miserable. She's in second year now. Had some significant challenges that cropped up in second year, and recently has decided that she's actually going to, not only is she going to go back to church, but she's going to move into a kind of a missional house on her campus. And there's this neat kind of, I've watched her parents walk alongside her over the last year. And I know in talking with them, the temptation has been to panic. And instead they've really fought to keep lines of communication open, to ask meaningful questions, to not push. Their daughter is like my daughter, so she's fairly direct and sniffs out any sense that they're pushing. And but it's been neat to see how she's actually how faith has become meaningful to her again, and she's recognized the need. And I can think of, I do want to be a realist too at some level, and can say I can just think of lots of stories from the last 20 years of people who had a particularly vibrant faith in a season of their life, and then become bitter and frustrated and walked away, or become indifferent. And I think that's the other side of the equation. We talk about doubt and deconstruction, and I liked how Andrew communicated it this morning, that when we talk about this, really we're talking about the people who are walking away frustrated, but there's a larger number of people who oftentimes are just walking away apathetic and indifferent, and that's a different set of challenges.
They did.
Yeah.
When you said a lot of this generation is asking, is Christianity good? I think that's a really good way of summing up kind of this generation's challenge. And it reminded me even of the video for human trafficking played today, talking about how this generation very much seemingly cares about justice, maybe not always the correct justice, but they do. And a lot of their corrections or addresses of Christianity is that it's done an injustice or it's bad for the world. So do you have any cool experiences or encounters of opportunities to kind of flip that on its head and show how the Bible, throughout the Testament, deeply, deeply cares about justice, and how it's very much in the language there?
Yeah, I love that question. And that's the beauty of it, right? Is that we actually fall back on a gospel calling that compels us to actually love our neighbor, and not theoretically, but in practice, that we would actually practically love our neighbor. So I've got teenage kids, and I'm trying to figure out how do I help my teenage kids understand what it means to follow Jesus. And so one of the stats that I heard actually was that it's one of the most meaningful things that kids can see is their parents genuinely trying to follow Jesus. The ways that their parents are practically and genuinely trying to follow Jesus, even if they fail. It's not that you're perfect at it, it's that there's some real faith that's compelling you in some way to do something. And so we had this experience, a couple weeks ago, where my wife got a phone call in the middle of the week from a woman that she had met at a play group when our 18-year-old son was 2 years old. I hadn't talked to her since then, And this woman basically said, listen, I've called through my whole phone book and nobody's answering, but I'm in an abusive relationship and I need to get out. And you answered the phone, can you help me? And so Lonnie said, yeah, I would help you. And so she went and picked her up. And then we had the next couple of days of trying to figure out, how do we help this woman who's in this situation? How do we get her the help that she needs? And really honestly, it was super awkward for our kids because this woman was living in her house and she brought a little dog with her and they did not like the little dog and all kinds of drama. You know, as Matt, my oldest, said, he said, you know, every time I'd come upstairs, it was like I had to go through some kind of a cut scene where she would ask me questions about my life and then I'd kind of scurry back downstairs. And anyway, without minimizing what this woman was going through, my kids were going through something and we were going through something because we didn't know how to help her. And yet she's sleeping in our home and we're trying to figure out how to help her. And so after a couple of days, we managed to get her sorted out and moved into kind of the next place where she could get more significant help for her situation. But then we sat down with our kids the next morning. We skipped church the next morning. So we dropped her off at we sorted this out at like 11 o'clock finally on a Saturday night after 4 days. And we told the kids when we got home, we're not going to go to church tomorrow. We're going to have brunch together and we're going to debrief what happened. Excellent. And so we sat around the table and we asked the kids what they felt about having this woman stay in our house. And I remember my daughter said something brilliant. She's like, well, I thought it was really awkward and uncomfortable and I didn't like it. And we said, yeah, no, so did we actually. Like, we found it hard. And I said, you know, like, and she said, yeah, and like, shouldn't you care about us? Like, and not just about this woman? And I said, yeah, no, we do. And I said, you know, and it wouldn't be like Jesus calls us to live sacrificially, and if it didn't cost us anything, it wouldn't actually be sacrificial. And so maybe feeling like it was uncomfortable is a way of us actually following in the way of Jesus, who was willing to be made uncomfortable on our behalf. And she said, well, okay. But it was a great moment. And we told them, we said, listen, we feel like we kind of screwed this thing up too, because we didn't know how to help her. We just knew that she needed help. And it got more complicated. And we just said, you know, we just want to be the kind of people that when somebody calls us like that we would always take that call. And so even though this was uncomfortable, we want you to know we would do it again. And that was the conversation around what does it mean to practically love people with our kids, was to say, man, that was a mess. And I think we kind of got a bunch of stuff wrong, but we'd do it again. Like, we would do it again because I think that's what Jesus wants us to do. And watching them watch us wrestle and try to put something into practice, I think is really meaningful. And so that's what I like. It's that kind of thing that I hope, it's that kind of thing that I think the next generation actually wants to see. They want to see what it costs us to actually live out an ethic of radical neighbor love.
I'd also say one of the things that's interesting on campus is watching in a previous term, there was a student that was struggling with depression in a very serious way. But just how many students came around this student was quite impressive. And it drained a lot of students too. Like, it was hard. Like, there was a real cost. But it's actually, yeah, it was great to see actually that student graduate, and he's still part of our community, still part of the faith. So it's interesting just even seeing other people wrestle with helping someone who's in a very difficult place. And I could see just, and we've had many conversations with wellness on campus as chaplains that I've had, where they just don't know what to do with student wellness. And I have shared a number of times that in our communities, like, we do support people through these things. We're not always their counselor, and they don't know what to do because there's an epidemic of that. Like, number of students asking to see a psychiatrist is way more than in the last number of years. But I do think that it's a lot worse for students who don't have someone, but community to walk with them. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah. Another question?
Hi, people. My name is, he's 25 years old. He finished the Western 4 years later, and now he's in the second year in Australia.
Okay.
So, and all this year, been by himself, he was not looking for a church or for a group in university of Christian students. So every time when I speak with him, I ask him to find a local church to engage in a university with Christian. But he's a nice guy, but he didn't do it up to this point.
Yeah.
What should I?
Hmm.
From my position.
Yeah. Thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah.
So the question was, having a 25-year-old son who's in Australia,
Nephew.
nephew, and he is just not going to church and not showing interest at this point. So what can I do? Yeah, I mean I think like there's always opportunity, no matter what, to pray. Like that's what I usually say. Like every year, to be honest, I would say at least 3 or 4 mothers message me saying that they would like their son is at university or their daughter, and can you connect with them? And I text them if they give me their number. I'll try to see if they're willing, but I wouldn't say too many have ever taken me up on that offer if they're apathetic themselves. But yeah, I think just letting them know of opportunities is sometimes a good thing. But practically, I think, prayer is one of our main things. I mean, you can always, when someone's at a distance, that's actually hard to model any form of Christ's love to help them see things differently. But I always think, depending on the relationship, unless someone tells you not to, you can always throw in a spiritual appetizer to see if they're willing to bite on it, like something that you're doing or that you're a part of, or that is meaningful to you. I think there is a level to just asking them a lot of questions too. When someone's not curious about Christianity, my usual response is say, be curious about them. Be really curious about them and honest about the struggles you have too in your life, so that it doesn't make Christianity sound perfectly rosy, but that you're a genuine person. And I think that could happen over the phone, but it is hard. And so I just, part of me is like, another part of me would say, get a bunch of people who are praying for you in that. Ask other people to join you in that, because I think the weight of that is I just felt that over the years by a number of people that have told me they have student connections in their family. And we need help as we just navigate our own family situations. Like I would say my life group, I've told them a number of times about the pain of my family, and sometimes people have prayed for that. So it's a reality, you know.
I know one of the things I'm trying to figure out now with my son who's 18 is how do I make sure that, there's a bunch of stuff I really want that guy to do. Like I want him to go to church, I want him to get in a small group, there's a list of things that I want him to do. And I'm trying to figure out how do I maintain the balance in my relationship with him between the things that I want him to do versus the ways that I'm just seeking to bless him and encourage him. And so I don't want him to feel like my interactions with Dad about faith are generally about him wanting me to do something else. Like there's something that I'm not doing, so that it creates a barrier of shame where he just feels like, yeah, my dad's just always disappointed that I'm not doing more. And so how do I actually speak words of blessing into his life? How do I actually just tell him like, boy, I just think you're fantastic. And I want you to know today I was praying that you would actually have a deep sense of peace as you go about your studies. And so I just wonder if in these relationships that we're in that are longer term like that, there's definitely a place we want to push people towards community. We want to remind them of what's true. And we want to be people who just speak blessing into their life and who remind them of God's posture towards them and the way that we posture ourselves towards them. And maybe just a funny idea might be to ask him to pray for you. Would be to say, and I've done this with my son in the last while, just to say, hey, Matt, I'm kind of stressed about this conference I got to go speak at. Would you pray for me this weekend? Like, just if you think of it, would you just pray for me? And now I'm asking him to do something that he actually feels empowered in. Anyway. Yeah.
This is something I'm kind of surprised hasn't been mentioned yet with respect to deconstruction, and appreciate your thoughts on this. It seems to me that a lot of times when the gospel is presented, it's sort of in a transactional basis. These are these things you got to accept as true. And have Jesus into your heart. Your sins are going to be forgiven. You get a hell-free card, but there's no expectations on it. You just come by faith. You don't have to obey. You don't have to repent, because those are works. This is faith. And there's nothing about developing this relationship of love with Jesus.
Yeah.
And I kind of wonder if that kind of transactional gospel lends itself more to the deconstruction rather than getting to know Jesus personally, loving him, obeying him. Is that an issue, or am I just way off base?
No, I heard that in Sunder's comments last night really clearly, that idea that we get caught up in something simplistic and small that actually misses the heart of what God's inviting us into. And so even as you were talking about that idea of a transactional gospel, or just a simple propositional acceptance of some statements, I wondered if where you might go with that would be, how are we helping people actually walk in a daily experience of the gospel where there's both lordship, but also an experience of sonship, where, I mean, I couldn't help thinking the verse that kept coming to mind this morning it's in Romans, where Paul talks about the Spirit being poured in, the Spirit of sonship being poured into our hearts so that our hearts cry out, Abba, Father, right? And so there's something experiential that we actually hope for, long for, and at some level should expect that the Spirit's being poured into our heart to actually cause us to have an experience of what it means to be loved by Jesus. And so yeah, I agree. I think that's a really meaningful part of this conversation, is inviting people into a deep experience of walking daily with God, of enjoying his presence, of experiencing both the convicting work of the Spirit as it relates to lordship. What does it mean for me to be somebody who obeys and who's willing to put myself second to Jesus? And what does it mean to be somebody who walks in sonship, who's in deep intimacy and is experiencing something of what it means to be loved by God? Yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about with students the relevance of Jesus to all of life, because I think sometimes, when it's just put aside like a propositional truth that I hold to on Sundays, that it doesn't, like, James is like life enabler, even in my studies right now, or in whenever I'm dealing with the problems that are going on today. I think that is a problem. Like whenever there's dissociation of it, and it also can be a problem for the person who is sharing the gospel too. If they see their job as just getting across these truths, like there can be a challenge that way too, or at least it can make the gospel seem like what I'm passing on. Like it doesn't make the rest of how you witness to someone feel like it's valuable if you're just like, that's all about getting across just those truths. So yeah, that's something we've thought a lot about recently in our ministry.
Yeah. I think we have time for one last question. At the back.
I was going to ask, how would you encourage youth and students to develop better friendships with one another? Because I think a lot of the youth I see have become very shallow with each other, and how to deal with conflict or go to other peers about issues really aren't very good at fostering real deep connections with each other. So what kind of advice or experiences have you had in like helping students actually foster meaningful relationships with one another that they can walk through their Christian faith with?
Great question. That is a really good question. I know it's one that we've talked a lot about too. I know one of our staff in Montreal, that's the most popular topic. Every year he does a talk on how to be a friend. And it's actually always hugely, significantly popular because it begins with that. It begins with how to be a friend. And then you begin to experience something deep and rich in community. I'm curious if you got any thoughts on that one, Ryan, from your space.
What comes to mind semi-regularly is someone brings up a conflict with another person, like another student, and they'll say, "Can you deal with this?" And my answer is no.
That's a great answer.
That happens every term at least once, yeah. But I think the other thing is I would say on average, I would say I try to create some isolated spaces for men, because men don't talk to each other. very well. And so like I even having like a men's breakfast has been helpful, where they talk to each other in not a formalized way sometimes, but most of the time they're, yeah, maybe it's just this COVID generation too, as I was thinking, but they don't know each other very well. I agree with you. I don't know if there's better ways to do it, but I'll ponder that more, like Mary.
I do think there's something about, so some of what we do in Power to Change is we encourage mentorship and discipleship relationships. And so I do think that there is something meaningful that gets modeled in those kinds of relationships about how to relate in a caring way towards other people. And so there's something in that probably is beginning to deal with that. And at the same time, I think it's just a meaningful space that we need to keep leaning into. I know with my kids, it's a regular conversation of what does it mean to be a good friend, and trying to coach them as they watch their friends go through different challenges about what it means to be a friend and walking alongside them. And yeah, good question.
We used to hold a seminar at the University of Waterloo, just like how to talk to another person too, because like there was a space where one season engineers were just having one-word answers to each other. So it's like maybe we need to bring that back.
Yeah, that's great. Was it you guys that was doing the speed friending as well?
Yeah, we've done speed friending.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's great. Well, wonderful. Why don't I close in prayer, and we will head into the next session upstairs. So, Father, we're grateful for your guiding and leading. We're grateful that, boy, when we talk about big topics like this, and inevitably just deeply personal topics, thanks that we've got each other, that you've given us one another. Thanks that we've got your scriptures. Thanks that we've got your Spirit, and that we can trust that you can lead us in this, and that we can actually seek your leading and guidance as we walk alongside friends and family members and colleagues who are struggling. And so, Father, I pray for each of us, even as we've just talked about being good friends. I pray, Father, that we would be people who ask meaningful questions, who put others in front of ourselves, and who are willing to walk alongside and be representatives of Christ, modeling grace and truth in our relationships. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.